Top diplomats from the G7 pledged to help Ukraine see through the coming winter as Russia continues its attack on civilian infrastructure.
Israel's outgoing Prime Minister Yair Lapid congratulates Benjamin Netanyahu after he secured enough seats to form a new government.
France's National Assembly is suspended after a far-right deputy is accused of shouting racist remarks at a black colleague.
Top diplomats of the G7 gathered in Germany, vowing to help Ukraine see through the coming winter. The foreign representatives expressed concern over food shortages and the energy crisis as Russia continues its attack on civilian infrastructure.
They cannot occupy it, they cannot win in the military, in the battlefield, they cannot win the war, and they are destroying the country systematically. Millions of Ukrainians have no longer access to electricity. And what Putin is willing to do is to put the country in the darkness in the winter time. This is a war crime.
Despite the advances of Ukrainian troops on the northeastern and southeastern fronts, a harsh winter is still expected for soldiers and civilians. President Volodymyr Zelensky said that more than 4.5 million people have lost access to electricity. But morale in the Ukrainian army is high as Kyiv's forces are preparing for a fierce battle to retake Kherson after the Russian puppet authorities of the city have renewed calls for the evacuation of civilians.
Ukraine's Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant has been disconnected from the power grid after Russian shelling damaged the remaining high-voltage lines, leaving it with just diesel generators, according to the Ukrainian nuclear firm Energoatom. Russian officials announced that occupation authorities began integrating the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant into the jurisdiction of Russian state nuclear firm Rosatom. Now, Zaporizhzhia is the largest of Ukraine's 4 nuclear power plants, which together provide about half of the country's electricity. This plant is the largest in Europe and the 9th largest in the world. It was captured by Russian forces in the early days of the full-scale invasion in February. Sitting on the eastern bank of the Dnipro River in Enerhodar in Zaporizhzhia region, the plant is of strategic importance to Russia because it is only about 200 kilometers from Crimea, which Russia annexed in 2014. The plant has 6 nuclear reactors, and when all of them are online, they can produce enough power to roughly 4 million Ukrainian homes. Ukraine's Energoatom stated that out of 11,000 people personnel before February, just over 6,500 remained here, and out of them, 100 people have signed new contracts with Russian energy agency Rosatom. Russian Security Council Secretary said that Russian forces have prevented a Ukrainian, quote, terrorist attack targeting the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. Now, Ukrainian nuclear firm Energoatom claims that the facility has 15 days worth of fuel to run the generators. And during this time, Russia might try to repair and connect the communication lines to the Russian grid in the direction of the temporarily occupied Crimea and Donbass.
There is no more to count. Former right-wing Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has the majority needed to form the next government in Israel. With 98% of votes counted, his Likud party would obtain 31 seats and 64 seats for the bloc he supports in a chamber of 120 deputies. The outgoing Prime Minister, the centrist Yair Lapid, has congratulated Netanyahu and has instructed his office to prepare an orderly handover. After 12 years in power, Netanyahu was ousted last year amid serious allegations of corruption and several open trials. He is expected to return to power backed by the ultra-right and ultra-Orthodox parties, and against the backdrop of the worst resurgence of violence between Israeli and Palestinians in the last 7 years. Pakistan's former Prime Minister Imran Khan and 9 others have been wounded after a gunman shot at the lorry they were travelling in. The apparent assassination attempt was carried out as Khan led a rally in Wazirabad in the province of Punjab. He sustained injuries to his leg and was rushed to hospital, and his condition is not believed to be serious, although the condition of the other victims is unknown. The suspected gunman, who was arrested at the scene, told reporters that his intention was to kill Khan because of statements he had made at an earlier rally in Lahore. Khan was travelling from Lahore to Islamabad with a convoy calling for a snap election, with little to no security presence.
Iranian protesters clashed with security forces on Thursday in the town of Karaj, west of the capital of Tehran. Hundreds of people blocked the highway that runs through the city and hurled rocks at police vehicles. According to the state-run Iranian media, a paramilitary was killed and 10 policemen were injured. The Iranian authorities assured they have made several arrests and have cleared the highway. The demonstrators gathered to mark the 40th day since the killing of one of the young women that was shot during the uprising. The death of Mahsa Amini at the hands of the morality police mid-September is at the origin of the historical nationwide revolt. But despite the regime's fierce repression, demonstrations have continued for more than 6 weeks all across the country.
The Bank of England has announced its biggest interest rate increase in 3 decades in an effort to tackle persistently high inflation. The UK central bank boosted its key rate by 0.75 percentage point to 3%. This is after price increases returned to a 40-year high in September. The hike is expected to dampen economic activity and lead to falling inflation next year. But the bank painted a grim picture of what's to come, predicting a 2-year recession across the country, which would be the longest economic downturn in more than half a century. Countries around the world are struggling to contain inflation, driven by higher energy and food costs due to the war in Ukraine. Like the Bank of England, many other central banks are aggressively raising interest rates in the hope that rising prices don't become entrenched. There is uproar in France over accusations of racism in the National Assembly. That faint heckle sounded like "Return en Afrique" or "Go back to Africa" in English, directed at black deputy Carlos Belongo. It took place during a debate on migration and was shouted by a member of the far-right National Rally Party, Gregor de Forna. He denies the accusation, saying that he was referring to migrant boats crossing the Mediterranean and not Belongo. The parliamentary session was quickly adjourned as condemnations were shouted from across the chamber. On Friday afternoon, parliamentary authorities will meet to decide what, if any, sanctions de Forna should face. Giorgia Meloni chose Brussels for her first visit abroad as Italy's new Prime Minister. She met in rapid succession with the 3 presidents of the main EU institutions, the European Parliament's Roberto Metsola, the European Commission's Ursula von der Leyen, and the European Council's Charles Michel. The busy afternoon gave her the chance to set Italian priorities at the EU level. She left saying the meetings went well.
I wanted to give a signal that Italy wants obviously to participate, cooperate and defend its own national interests within the European dimension. And this looking together with our European partners for the best solutions to the big challenges we're facing.
Meloni also said it was an opportunity to change the way European leaders might perceive her. Observers say she's radically softened her anti-Brussels rhetoric and now seems to view EU institutions as potential allies rather than a brake on her goals.
In this attempt that Giorgia Meloni is pursuing to reposition herself from a hard nationalist right to a conservative centre-right, in this kind of turn towards moderation. Let's see, to what extent and how long it will last. But very clearly, this is the attempt that is being made.
Some of the more contentious topics on the agenda included energy and migration, More consensus was found around the war in Ukraine. Collaboration, a smooth relationship and common goals are in both sides' interests. But these smiles and nice words still have to make it through the next few crucial months.